The sun had barely climbed above the city rooftops when fate reached out with greasy hands and a broken timing belt, turning an ordinary morning into the kind that rearranges a life. On a quiet roadside washed in pale gold daylight, a single father knelt beside a stalled car, unaware that the woman pacing behind him in rising panic was the very person he had spent weeks dreading to meet. Sometimes destiny does not knock politely, it strands you under an open sky and watches who you choose to help when no one is watching. Before the story unfolds, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet ways people save each other without realizing it, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Shadowverse. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Aarav had learned to measure mornings by responsibility. He woke with the sun because his son needed breakfast before school and because the world did not pause for grief or exhaustion. Daylight was his ally, it made things feel possible, manageable, honest. He drove an aging pickup with a toolbox rattling in the back because fixing things was what he knew how to do when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. Being a single dad had sharpened him and softened him all at once, turning him into a man who noticed the smallest details, like the way morning light settled on a cracked windshield or how silence could feel heavy even in traffic. That particular day carried an extra weight. Aarav was on his way to a blind date arranged by a well-meaning coworker who believed everyone deserved to try again. The thought made his chest tighten. Dating felt like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged without permission. He dreaded expectations, explanations, and the possibility of disappointment. The woman he was supposed to meet had been described as successful, composed, and recently divorced, words that echoed like judgments he was not sure he could live up to. He told himself he could always leave early, that it was daytime, casual, harmless, but dread clung to him like heat. A few miles from the café, traffic slowed near a bend in the road where a compact sedan sat stranded with its hood up. A woman stood beside it, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders tight, scanning the empty stretch as if answers might appear between passing clouds. Aarav felt the familiar tug he could never ignore. He signaled, pulled over, and grabbed his toolbox without thinking. Kindness had become instinct, the way breathing was, because he wanted his son to grow up in a world where help arrived even when it was inconvenient. The woman's car had overheated, steam curling lazily into the bright morning. Aarav worked with practiced calm, checking hoses, tightening a loose clamp, topping off fluids from a spare bottle he carried for emergencies. He noticed how the woman's hands trembled, how she tried to appear composed while panic leaked through the edges. He noticed the scuff on her shoe, the faint smear of grease she got on her wrist when she leaned too close, the way relief flickered when the engine finally purred back to life. He kept his focus on the work, not on her face, because sometimes it was easier to fix machines than to navigate people. Time moved differently in daylight. The road hummed, birds argued from a nearby fence, and the crisis shrank into something manageable. When the car was running again, Aarav wiped his hands and nodded, satisfied. He felt lighter, the way he always did after helping someone. It was only then that he glanced at his watch and felt a jolt of anxiety. He was already running late. The date he dreaded crept closer, an appointment he could not fix with a wrench. As the woman thanked him, she mentioned being late herself, her voice edged with embarrassment and urgency. She explained she was headed to a café not far away, meeting someone for a blind date she wasn't sure she wanted. The coincidence made Aarav's stomach drop. The café name was the same one circled on his own mental map. A strange unease settled over him, a quiet knowing he tried to ignore as they both prepared to leave. The drive that followed felt surreal. Sunlight streamed through his windshield, illuminating dust motes like tiny confessions. He rehearsed polite exits and gentle apologies, reminding himself that leaving early was allowed. He pulled into the café parking lot just as the woman he had helped parked a few spaces away. When she stepped out and turned toward him, recognition rippled across both their faces with the force of a held breath finally released. The dread he had carried crystallized into understanding. Fate had a sense of timing that bordered on cruel humor. Inside the café, daylight spilled across wooden tables and potted plants, making everything feel exposed and honest. Aarav felt stripped of defenses. There was no mystery left to hide behind, no polite distance. He saw her clearly now, Mira Ellison, the woman with tired eyes that held both strength and recent sorrow, the woman he had just met in the most unguarded way possible. He realized his dread had not been about her at all, but about himself, about being seen as he was. They sat across from each other, sunlight between them, and the air was thick with unspoken truths. Aarav thought of his son waiting at school, of the lunches he packed with care, of the nights he lay awake wondering if he was enough. Mira thought of her own unraveling, of a marriage that had taught her resilience at the cost of tenderness. Their stories hovered, unsaid but present, like shadows softened by daylight. As the morning unfolded, something shifted. The tension eased into a fragile ease born from shared vulnerability. Aarav noticed how Mira listened with her whole attention, how she smiled without pretense, how gratitude lingered in her eyes from the roadside rescue. Mira noticed the grease under his nails, the gentleness that had guided his hands, the quiet steadiness that felt like safety. The dread that had framed the day loosened its grip, replaced by curiosity and an unexpected warmth. Challenges did not vanish, they surfaced. Aarav wrestled with guilt for feeling hopeful, afraid of betraying a past that still ached. Mira battled the instinct to retreat, to armor herself against disappointment. Daylight, however, has a way of insisting on clarity. It exposes fears and possibilities alike, asking what you will do with what you see. The hours passed, and the café thinned as lunchtime approached. Aarav checked his phone and saw a message from his son's school, a reminder of the world waiting beyond this moment. Responsibility tugged again, but it no longer felt like a chain. Mira shared her own obligations, her life carefully rebuilt after loss. They recognized the parallels, the way both carried love and weariness in equal measure. When they finally stood to leave, the story did not resolve into certainty. It settled into something gentler, more honest. They stepped outside into the bright afternoon, where shadows shortened and possibilities felt closer. Aarav offered to follow Mira for a bit, just to be sure her car held up, the protector in him unwilling to disengage. She accepted, not out of need but out of trust. Driving home later, Aarav felt a quiet shift within himself. The dread that had shadowed the day had transformed into something like gratitude. He realized that showing up, even when afraid, was its own kind of courage. Helping a stranger had led him to a connection he had not known he needed, one grounded not in fantasy but in daylight truth. Mira, too, carried the encounter with her, replaying the moment her car sputtered to life and how a simple act of kindness had altered the course of her day. She felt seen not as a resume of achievements or a catalogue of wounds, but as a person worthy of care without conditions. The daylight had given her permission to believe again, cautiously, tenderly. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the world in warmer tones, both felt the quiet promise of what might be. Not a grand romance written in stars, but a steady, human connection forged in ordinary circumstances. The kind that grows from shared mornings, from showing up when things break down, from choosing kindness even when dread whispers otherwise. If this story has been quietly unfolding in your chest, if it reminds you that small acts can reroute entire lives, please take a moment now to like, comment, and share this video, and subscribe to Shadowverse. Your engagement helps these stories travel further than we ever could alone. Just before we part, we have a special request for you. Comment below with the word kindness if you believe one small good deed can change a destiny. In the end, Aarav tucked his son into bed that night with a lighter heart, and Mira parked her repaired car under a sky still glowing with day's last light. Neither knew exactly where the road would lead, but both understood something essential had already happened. They had met not as performances, not as expectations, but as people in the open, honest daylight. And sometimes, that is enough to begin again.